Okay, don't judge your neighbor for what they shared. Welcome. Hi everybody, I'm Ryan Pierce, chair of the Low-Res MFA in Visual Studies here at PNCA. Welcome to our last artist talk of the summer. I want to start by acknowledging that the land where PNCA is located rests on the traditional village sites of the Multnomah, Cathlamet, Clackamas, Tualatin, Kalapuya, Molalla, bands of the Chinook, and other tribes who made their homes along the Columbia River. We acknowledge that the systemic policies of genocide, relocation, and assimilation that still impact many Indigenous Native American families today. As settlers and guests on these lands, we respect the work of Native nations, leaders, and families, and make ongoing efforts to center Indigenous knowledge, creativity, resilience, and resistance. I invite you all to spend some time with the Arrowhead Project, which is a long-term installation of a series of works by Indigenous artists addressing the history of this institution and the place it occupies, which you'll find throughout the atrium outside this room. This is our last event for the summer session, and before I introduce tonight's artists, I want to thank some of the people who've been crucial to the success of Hot Art Summer 2024. Foremost, grad school program coordinator, Erin Dengerink. Erin is our benevolent puppet master, handles a million things with a degree of calm and competence that does not make sense to me. Thank you also to Laura Kim for extra help and availability behind the scenes. Thank you to Isa and to Megan for communications wizardry and really cool graphics. Thank you, Danny and Chris and the IT team, who never make me feel like an idiot when I forget how to share my screen on Zoom or forget that I changed my password to muffintop69 3 weeks ago, locked myself out of my email. Anyway, I'm not going to go there. Danny in the booth. Big ups to Oliver for helping our thesis exhibition shine, to the facilities team for moving all the moving parts around every day. Thank you, Jay Ponteri, for introducing me to the low-res conspiracy. And thank you to our summer faculty and mentors for brilliant, challenging, and value-centered support for our students. And of course, to the 3 active cohorts of LRVS students, our alumni, wider PNCA community, who are building this program into something exciting and unstoppable and rich with intellectual and creative rewards. Thank you, students. And I know I'm forgetting a bunch of people, but until I shut up, before I shut up until 2025, tonight we are honored to welcome Diné artist Natani Notah. Notah's mixed media paintings and sculptures have a visual vocabulary that vibrates with idiosyncrasy and kinetic potential. Flaps, caps, hooks, fringe, loops, flags, flames. This work is grounded in bold shapes and the urgency of implied movement, symbolic abstraction on the page that teeters and leans. Her sculptures predict their use, pouches and bundles and sacks caught in postures that infer the weight of gravity and their impending utility. What are these for? Notah situates her practice amid a resurgence of Indigenous feminism, one that rejects settler colonial binaries that demand prioritizing either Indigenous or feminist. It's a reminder that Native lifeways are complex and enduring and offer paradigms of resilience that can slip outside this capitalist, extractivist hellscape of dominant culture. Natani Notah earned her MFA from Stanford University in 2018 and has been riding a wave of accolades ever since. She's been in residence at MASS MoCA, the Santa Fe Art Institute, a fellow at the Headlands Center for the Arts, Kayla Art Institute, and the Tulsa Artist Fellowship. She's had solo exhibitions at Document in Chicago and Turin in Dallas, and a 2-person show with sound artist Kite in Tulsa. She generously flew cross-country to join us from her current fellowship at the Lunder Institute for American Art in Maine. Please join me in welcoming Natani Notah.
Thank you for that really generous, beautiful introduction. So hello, everybody. My name is Natani Notah. I'm an artist and an enrolled member of the Navajo Nation. I have a bit of a lengthy introduction too, and these are my notes, so I'll go ahead and get started. As was mentioned, I'm currently based in Waterville, Maine, having recently started an academic year-long fellowship with the Lunder Institute for American Art, which is a collaborative initiative of the Colby College Museum of Art. Much of my art explores contemporary Native American existence through the lens of Indigenous feminism, and I'm really happy to be here today to talk to you about my art practice and share some context for how I ended up on a creative life path. First, I want to give thanks to PNCA's low residency MFA program, with a special thanks to Ryan Pierce for this invitation to speak with you all today. And before I get into my own work, I wanted to read a poem by Audre Lorde titled A Litany for Survival. It's from 1978, and it's inspired many folks, including myself. And I think it will set the tone for the rest of this talk. So Lorde writes, "When our stomachs are empty, we are afraid. We may never eat again. When we are loved, we are afraid. Love will vanish. When we are alone, we are afraid. Love will never return. And when we speak, we are afraid. Our words will not be heard, nor welcomed. But when we are silent, we are still afraid. So it is better to speak, remembering we were never meant to survive." Okay, so for some background, I was born and raised in San Bernardino, California, and I grew up traveling between there and different parts of Arizona to visit my family. So I very much consider the Southwest to be home. I always like to start my presentations with an acknowledgement of my ancestors and family. I wouldn't be where I am today without their love and support. And so here is a picture of me and my siblings, who are all amazing in their own rights, and they have encouraged me to pursue being an artist ever since I can remember. Another huge influence on my life's path was my dad. Here is a picture of him holding me when I was a baby. I love this picture in particular because it shows how since birth he was a caring parent. He was also an extremely tough, hardworking individual who taught me how to be a strong Dene woman. He taught me how to walk in beauty and always acknowledged my gifts for art and learning. When I turned 15, he passed away from cancer, which was one of the hardest things our family had to go through. But before he had to leave this world, he told me to go to college so I could equip myself with the tools to, in his words, not end up like him. I took this to heart, and for years I put all of my effort into getting into a good college where I could also pursue my art. This journey took me all over the country and abroad, where I learned how art had the potential to shift the social consciousness and shape or influence things like politics, law, and policy. So I started out as a painter and a printmaker. I wanted to include this example from 2019. It's titled Keep Runnin'. I made this in graduate school after I finished my thesis, and I was tired of my thesis work, and I went back into the studio and decided to put everything that was going on in my head onto the page. So I, in the past, have described these almost as mind maps or a stream of consciousness. There's some automatic drawing that's happening in them. And these were what inspired a series of works later that I'll talk about later. In graduate school, I predominantly focused on sculpture and installation of those objects. And this is a detail of that one bolo piece in the back wall there. So I focused on sculpture, and I was interested in the intersection between sculpture, installation, and performance-based work. I'm going to go ahead and share a little snippet from that performance-based work. This is from a project titled CL Powered, which really investigates how one's culture influences the way that they navigate through environments. I'm performing. I ended up walking through different parts of San Francisco, and what you're seeing is an enlarged version of a Navajo hair tie. And so it would go to the ground, and while I was performing, it would alter the ends. And this project, I consider it ongoing, something that I think has a lot of potential to be performed essentially anywhere. But with performance, I found it to also be some of the most, like the hardest work that I had done, because you really can't control other people and their reaction to it. So this project in particular, I've kind of put it on a shelf and I might revisit it later. But I found it to be important to share it with you guys today because it informs some of the newer projects. This is that work installed. So you can see the 3 different versions. They're kind of floating in space. I wanted it so that you could walk through them and then also in your periphery see the video playing in the background, which would inform how the different ends, depending on where I was, kind of picked up the diatrice or the natural remnants of that place. So I found it to be a really beautiful metaphor. And again, was the way that I documented it, right? We have the sculpture or the object that was altered through performance. We have the video, and then there was also photographs that came from the project as well. So it kind of exists in all these different mediums, and this was like the only time that it all came together and was in this group show in San Francisco. So then fast forwarding only a few years later, but this piece titled Outfoxed is an example of a soft sculpture that I had made. I call them soft sculptures because I use different fabrics and leather and faux fur and artificial sinew, and they're stuffed with an artificial corn pellet. And then in this case, there's this armature, this found laundry hanging. It was used for a laundry basket. And these works were part of a solo exhibition in San Francisco after graduation. And that exhibition was titled Normal Force. And so I was really interested in the kind of push and pull and kind of power at play, and how some of these objects can start to comment on that in maybe more subtle or abstracted ways. In that exhibition, there was also a video that was playing in the back room. And this, I very much consider it the piece to be the video and not the performance, not a performance. And so I'll just let you guys view this and talk a little bit after. It's only a minute and a half. So that video was playing in the back room, and it was on a loop. So it was going back and forth, in theory, infinitely. I titled this Dragged, and I produced it, and I didn't think at first it was a work. It was more just me in the studio messing around and trying to find ways to document and activate the sculptures. Because when I'm in the studio, they're very much alive, and I'm moving them, flipping them over, sewing things down so they feel animated. And then once they go into the gallery, they feel kind of at rest. And so I wanted to find what that in between was. And so this video, I made this video, and then I thought, is it too simple? Is that too easy? Is it too weird? It was generating a lot of questions, but I trusted my gut, and I decided I wanted it to be in the show. And so we projected it into a dark space in the back of the gallery, and it would go back and forth, side to side. And what I love about it is, yes, it's simple, but it also speaks to kind of and provides a sense of the weight of some of these sculptures, which I think gets lost in the images. The images tend to kind of flatten it, and perhaps also you don't really know how big this thing is in real life. And so this gives, again, like a weight and a density to the piece. And then in this case, a lot of other avenues to go down. I was thinking about dragging a body kind of back and forth. I was thinking about performance and gesture. I was thinking about the power of just a simple gesture, and many other things like that loop, and going back and forth felt almost like a ping pong match, or referencing kind of cyclic abuse, like kind of things happening over and over again. But there's something also empowering about it, this idea of kind of pulling this dead weight behind you. And so I was kind of thinking about and referring to kind of the weight that we carry, depending on, your background, what you've been through, and how we carry that with us. So fast forward again, a year later, I was doing the Tulsa Artist Fellowship, and that is, for me, it was a 2-year program. And it was the first time where I was really able to make work that I wanted to make, that was, I guess, because I had that support and I had that space, I was really allowing myself to make whatever I wanted, versus the work prior felt like I was responding to a prompt or to a deadline. And so I found myself going back to working on paper and doing these mixed media collages. This one's titled Justice For. The detail there, Justice for MMIW2S, girls and men. So that acronym stands for Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women, Two Spirits, Girls and Men. I was thinking about this idea of adding on to that acronym, and how it's going to need to involve everybody in order to kind of get over this mountain or this hurdle. There's a lot of symbolism that goes into these works on paper. I love duality and multiplicity. So, for example, I was thinking about these as being the two figures that are on this kind of tightrope or this bar, as being, they could be birds, they could be like heads, they could be breasts, they could become all of these other things, but then they could also be kind of not able to be defined. So I found that to be really empowering. There's a few other symbols, but for the sake of time, I'll move to the next slide. Simultaneously, I like to work in series, and I like to work on multiple things at once. And so I was having these kind of simple but funky assemblages, sculptural assemblages started to take form. Part of my practice is using found materials. And so this hook was, that metal hook was something that I had found in my walking around. And I picked it up because I liked that curved shape, and thinking about how it relates to my other practice, that metal, metallic, looking similar to the color of the graphite in the collage work. For this piece, I was also thinking about a hook as an arm, and again, that extension of a body. And then with the beadwork at the bottom, it's just black seed beads that are kind of going up and dissipating. And I was thinking about swarms, or like viruses kind of taking over. And I loved, again, that it could be all of these things and kind of nothing at the same time. So I loved how these, for me, were like ants or birds, and then again, viruses, or almost something that's taking over a flap of skin. So maybe a bruise or something of that nature. Here's another one of these assemblages. This one's titled She's Raring to Go, which is kind of a play on words. It's a found skateboard truck, and then I included black horsehair, thread, and screws. I like to include this piece because, as you can tell, I made it in 2021, but then I altered it in 2023. So it had been selected to be put into this group show, and it looked slightly different. And once it was in the show, I almost felt like it wasn't done. And then when it came down from the show, I got back into the studio with it. I then added the thread around the horsehair to create this kind of bobble braid. And then I was like, okay, now it's done. And so I just wanted to share it kind of as an example of how even the work can kind of morph and change and be influenced by where it travels in the world. So that's why that's there. The next piece is titled Grabbing for Land. Again, was made simultaneously. What I love about this piece in particular is this detail. And what I was referencing is the land back movement that is ongoing and happening as I'm speaking. But I was also looking at images online and in the news, and this image in particular became really important. I loved the signage, and I was thinking about kind of the history of activism and how a lot of them are handmade. And I just loved the watercolory application. It looks like almost like watercolor paper, the different texture, and then really evidence of the hand being there, as well as you can see the woman on the left-hand side with her hand raised up in protest. And this next piece is titled Jane Roe, which is very much referencing kind of protest, but I was also thinking about an arm being kind of up to defend oneself, perhaps, or to raise a hand to ask a question or call attention to something. And this piece I made and titled it Jane Roe specifically because Roe versus Wade had just been overturned across the nation, but where I was at in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Oklahoma is a trigger state, so it immediately became illegal to have an abortion, and there was a lot of tension around the subject in the area and across the nation. And this felt like a way, using my art as a way to respond or comment on what was going on. And so there's this kind of symbolism, but then at the same time, it could be like an avant-garde handbag, or it could be, this like weird alien form. It could just be this abstract sculpture. And I love that about this piece in particular. Here's a detail shot of some of the beadwork that's on the outside. And the beadwork is this is the first time where it's not a full-on cluster, and it's just, again, trying to push the beadwork from kind of common examples of like medallions or barrettes or regalia. And in this case, it's not any of those things, but it's still referencing them, if that makes sense. Something else about this piece is that it's been shown a number of times, but I'm happy that this October it's being picked up again to be shown in a exhibition about reproductive freedom, and it's going to actually travel back to Dallas, Texas, where the case originates from. And I think that's kind of really beautiful that it's going to be shown there, be part of this group exhibition surrounding reproductive rights, and be in Dallas, kind of where it all started. So it feels like Jane Roe is going back to Dallas. Here's just to provide some context for how the work operates in proximity to some of the works on paper, and how there's this kind of beginning to develop this language between, you know, basic things like color, shape, form. There's just these really nice moments when the work is all in one place where you can start to see those connections. Here's another image that I really like that was taken at the opening of the show. And as was mentioned, this was a 2-person show with Suzanne Kite, who had work in it as well. And we came up with the title In the Realm of Miracles. And it was a really great show. I am really proud of this work. And I just loved this image of this visitor taking her time with the pieces. And she actually came up to me after or during, and I was trying to be like kind of a fly on the wall, and she kind of saw me, came up to me, and she was like, "Are you the artist?" And I was like, "Yes." And then she was like, just so appreciative. You know, she was just grateful, and she just said, "Thank you for your work." She's like, "I can feel kind of the energy of it." And that really stuck with me, that she took the time, not only with the work, but the time to then come up and talk to me afterwards. And it's moments like that that kind of propel me forward to keep making work, because I don't always know what's going to land or resonate with people. And sometimes, especially if you're alone in your studio making work, it can kind of feel very solitary, and moments of existential crisis will come up, like, what am I doing, and does this matter? And so it's moments like that that like remind me, like, it does matter, it does have an impact, even if it's subtle and momentary, kind of ephemeral. So I'll go ahead and just play a clip of this, which shows you some of the work via video, so you can kind of get a sense of it. And yeah. I can turn this down and kind of talk over it a little bit. I like to include the videos when I can, just so that you can see some of the details again that get lost in the photographs that tend to flatten the work, or even there's some examples here where I don't have a slide, but it's here in video form, so you can start to see some of the repetition and examples of how the works relate to one another. And there at the end, you saw that sign of the collage workshop and an example of what community members did when they came to the space. They had this option of taking fragments and collaging them and creating their own work of art, which was really nice. I lived really close to the gallery, so I liked walking by and seeing how it changed over the course of the exhibition. And again, it was a way that, another way in which people can navigate the work and respond to the work. And so I felt like it was a really nice little community moment. So then fast forwarding to last year, 2023, I was approached by a gallery in Chicago. They have a location in Chicago and Lisbon by the name of Document. And they had actually seen the online version and documentation from the show at 108 Contemporary. And so we had a studio visit and we started to talk about working together, and they offered me an opportunity to have a solo exhibition, and they wanted to include some of the pieces from the 108 Contemporary show, such as this one titled Hero Twins, and then they wanted me to make some new works. And here's another angle from this piece. For more context, this piece is titled Hero Twins. I'm referencing some of the Navajo creation stories and the different figures in them. So there's one figure named Changing Woman, and Changing Woman gave birth to twins who became known as the Monster Slayers. And so this is a response to it, very loosely. But I really liked this idea of duality. There's like a reference to yin and yang. There's definitely a conversation that can be had about balance and mirroring and all of that. So I do really like this piece a lot. And this is an example of a collage work that I made specifically for the show with Document. And this one's titled Swing Low. And I have a little write-up about it. So part of my practice, I write, whether it's in my notes app or I keep a journal and a sketchbook where I'll talk about and write about stuff. And I realize it's more of a stream of consciousness. And then some people are like, it's poetry. And so for this piece, this is what I wrote about it. Upside down, a restricted area, no trespassing, babies throwing rocks, a cradle or a swing, a peyote button, heart pumping blood and good medicine, a hummingbird holding everything afloat. So many ideas, but I think it's really about small acts of resistance, so you don't collapse into a broken pile of bits, pieces of the things that you hold dear, things that they're always trying to take away. And here's the detail that I wanted to point out. So we have this upside down flag, and as many of you probably know, it's kind of an indication of, there's different readings on it, but it's an indication of, something distress. But this is actually coming from a archival image that was taken during the American Indian movement. And I have this, I do research, I look online, I look for images, inspiration, and then keep kind of folders of different images. And this one kept coming up. It's also, if you Google the American Indian movement, it's like one of the first images that comes up on like the first page. So there's all these reasons and why I chose to use it. And then this is how it aided in the composition of this piece. And then here's a current example of the upside down flag. And what I like and appreciate about this image is also, again, the handwritten protest signs. So we will never stop fighting. Healthcare is a human right. Abortion bans are racist. So there's a lot happening in just like one image. And I find I get a lot of inspiration from that. Here's Swing Low installed next to this other piece that I really think had some visual similarities. I also think about the collage works as singular, being able to exist on their own, but then almost like strength in numbers. Once they're in the same room or next to another piece, it feels like there's this continuation of the narrative. I also think about it almost like, I'm not a musician, I wish I was, but almost like notes or composition, where you're creating movement and flow from one to another. And this is that kind of example where I think it does happen, where it's this kind of wave. So that piece on the right was titled Navajo Leg with a Fishnet Stocking. I kind of think I keep coming back to this piece. I think this is one that feels kind of like a self-portrait, but again, it's abstracted to the point where it is not a self-portrait, but there's the reoccurring symbols, such as the hogan, which is a Navajo home, representation of home. There's a fishnet leg stocking. I was thinking about actually A Christmas Story and that leg lamp. And then on the right bottom corner are these like for sale signs for these Roma tomatoes. So there's this like kind of absurdity that I'm interested in. And I feel like I'm playing in these, and there are some inside jokes. So it's kind of a if you know, you know situation. I've also described it as like gifts for the careful viewer. So if you're really kind of paying attention or really considering the work, you then start to connect all the dots yourself, or maybe even go off into all these other avenues and kind of walk away from it with your own interpretation, which I also love. For this piece too, something that I learned from it after making it is I realized I was creating all these entry and exit points that I wasn't like conscious of in the beginning. And then I was like, oh, okay, like, sure, like, that's what you're kind of taught when you're in drawing class or painting like 101, of creating these like entry and exit points, and really being able to draw attention and think about where your viewer's eye is going to go first. So I was like, sure, okay, that's part of it. But then in this piece, you'll notice there's like a vent up in the top left. There's also a window, which this little figure is looking out of. And for me, I really realized that these entry and exit points were kind of ways to escape. And so I was thinking about, for example, like the country and how much there's so much violence, mass shootings, for example, where I don't know about you, but I'm constantly kind of assessing a situation and thinking about if I needed to leave, how would I leave? Or on a kind of more like metaphorical level, how do you kind of escape if you're dealing with mental health issues or things such as, depression or anxiety? What are some of those things that you might do? And so this little sad, depressed little figure is kind of looking out of this window, but they're just looking. But then another interpretation or question is, are they going to jump out that window? So it can kind of go in all these different directions, but that entry exit point for me is actually more freeing than it is anything else. Moving forward, this soft sculpture is titled Spider Woman's Jaws. Spider Woman is another Navajo figure. She was the one that taught us how to weave, and I really like that idea. This piece, I made it while I was in residence at MASS MoCA, and so I had brought limited materials with me and was pulling all of these scraps together and trying to kind of experiment with the beadwork again, created this patch. And I think that was because I was also looking at these maps of the Navajo Nation and how it is a checkerboard, and thinking about the checkerboard being not just like an aesthetic thing or a design element, but then if it's in a map such as this, there is this, oddly, I was thinking about it almost like a rug, or it really started to make me think about the language of maps and how to start incorporating that into the collage works. Here's another example of a map that I was looking at. This is for the police districts, and this is the piece that includes a part of that map. This one is titled Free for All, And I also wrote a little stream of consciousness for this piece. So I had written, when I make these works on paper, I try to allow myself to play with the language of abstraction and find a balance between surrealism and minimalism. This often results in a hard to define surreal world where limbs and lines connect, float, and dive into each other. In this example, titled Free for All, a pond, pool, or portal grounds the scene, while red and white fabrics hang or blow in the wind. Although my favorite element is probably the horseshoe-shaped skin flap that straddles a tightrope, clothesline, and or needle. As you can gather from this description, each element is multiple things and more depending on who is looking at it. And so here's the detail that I like, which includes a little section of that police district map, but Window Rock is prominent in it, and that's where my father's side of the family is from. And then this little detail, I like that horseshoe skin flap shape. And then I also like this moment where these two, this white flag and this red flag or fabrics come together. And the way I've described it in the past has been a moment where two things meet, mate, or marry, and then they can coexist. And I think that's really beautiful. These like really subtle, small moments where these things, separate things are coming together and coexisting and or creating kind of a new form. I think that's exciting. This next piece, titled Aired Out, was something I made for the document show. This piece I have never really talked about before. Again, there's the window that's in the right-hand corner, which actually comes from a photograph that I had taken. I had a health scare, and I was in a clinic, and I was sitting, and I took a picture of this window because there was this it was so serene and beautiful outside. But in my mind, I was really worried and really scared about why I was there. And so that image, I took it just with my iPhone, and then I used that photo reference to take that window and put it into this piece. So there's something really kind of light and airy that I love about this one. These kind of figures and scraps and shapes most of them are tethered down and tied down to this almost like a bowl vessel. And then again, we have a little map in the bottom that's kind of the anchor for that. And then we have these socks. And so I wanted to include this because as a insight into what's going on. And a lot of the times people are not all people, but some people might look at the work and be like, okay, well, it's kind of simple. And what else, or that's kind of easy. What else is going into it? Well, those socks come from a photograph that I had taken when I was just walking. I had seen these socks out of the corner of my eye. And the way that they were, it almost felt like the feet were still in them, if that makes sense. They were kind of crumpled up, but it was it made me think of somebody, if they had gotten frightened or had to leave in a rush, that they had just kind of jumped out of their socks. And the person was gone, but their socks were still there. And it just felt kind of ghostly, but then really alive at the same time. And it just struck me. So I took a picture of it. Didn't think much of it until I was going back into the studio, I think days later at this point. And I was looking at this piece and the socks weren't there, and I was needing something. The piece wasn't done. I needed to add something to it. And then I thought about those darn socks again. And so I printed out this photograph at different sizes just on computer paper. And I decided to do black and white for heavy contrast, printed them out, and then started to cut out all of these socks at different sizes. And then just kind of a puzzle, start placing it all around the composition to figure out where it needed to be. And I decided that it needed to be right where it is, right there. And it needed to be this particular size. And it also needed to be angled at such a way where it then started to look maybe like a butterfly, if you squint, or a bird. or a ninja star, or like it started to then become all of these other things. But then it could also just be a pair of like dirty socks. And then as it related to this like tightrope clothesline, I thought that there was a nice or a beautiful relationship, because to me, they're very much like these fragments are like, there's a flag, there's maybe like a picnic blanket, and then there's this like almost like a soft sculpture skin flap. There's like a bra, but then there's this arm that's like not human, but maybe it's a spider leg. So there's a lot going into it, and that goes into it. It doesn't just like magically appear, but it does kind of feel like there's this like intuition, and there's all these like multiple decisions that go into just one piece, and then you times that by many pieces. And I think what I'm trying to get at is that it feels like I'm like building a alternate universe, or like a world in which these things can exist, and they can also have well, kind of like they have another opportunity at life, a second chance, but that they're also, you have to look at them if you're looking at this piece. And so there's, again, this way of like kind of giving power to the disempowered, or seeing value in something that's devalued. And I think that's really what's at the heart of a lot of what I do. So moving forward, this one's titled Spread Eagle, and I made it simultaneously around the same time. So I really love this like beautiful like powder blue satin, and what those actually are shoulder pads. And I had taken them out of this like billowy shirt blouse that I'd gotten at a thrift store. But I loved the powder blue, and it's a callback to one of the pink ones. It's called Pinky and the Brain, that was in the video. And that's also using satin from shoulder pads. And so I take those shoulder pads, I take out the polyester stuffing, and then I stuff it with these corn pellets, and then do the beadwork in between, and then have this artificial fur. And I usually paint that artificial fur into place, so it has kind of a stiffness to it, and almost like using the paint as a gel, or like a way to kind of control some of the flyaways and the static that you get working with artificial fur. But yeah, this one, I liked how the beads going in between felt like almost like connective tissue, or umbilical cords, or even like a cat's cradle game or something. It started to, or like a corset, like, so I was looking at it and I was like, there's all these other things. Love it. Okay. And so this piece felt like it was finished. I titled it Spread Eagle, because I like the definition of spread eagle, how it usually is referencing or alluding to the body, and kind of being spread eagle, kind of arms and legs outstretched, kind of out wide. And so, yeah, there's a lot you can read into it, or at least that's the hope. And so I did this a residency at the Santa Fe Art Institute, and I kind of struggled in that residency, and I wasn't really making very much. And towards the end, this is actually what I made, and it was a photograph. And this photograph is me standing with my wall, with my, facing the wall of a gallery at the residency. And then there's this inclusion of a flag, one of those landscaping flags. And then this one is titled Staking a Claim. And so I was very much thinking about how historically there's been all of these like land grabs and staking of a claim to land, but then how that translates to the body as well, and to the original peoples of the land. And then I realized once I got back from that residency and started to, look at this image and think about this image more, what I really loved about it was this. So it's a cropping in detail, but this became kind of the piece. I titled this one Intellectual Property because I was thinking about, again, that staking of a claim to land and bodies and resources, but also how that can translate or apply to intellectual property as well. And so, yeah, this piece I really like a lot. I think it's because, again, I see a lot of different things when I look at it. To me, this is like an anthill or a mound or a mountain. But it then made me think of Cousin It from the Addams Family. And I kind of liked it because it was like this, it's kind of uncanny when you don't see the rest of the body. And I just really appreciate that about this piece. There's this optical illusion that's happening. Kind of when you look at it, is it piercing the head or is it just kind of stuck in the hair? And then the centering of that flag, kind of referencing like a feather or these other readings or connotations that you might associate or, yeah. This piece. Oh, okay. So I do like this piece, and it's also much smaller. I think if I do show this one, it needs to be really big. And it was talked about for this last show that I did. This was the image they wanted to use, but then through all the logistics, we ended up not doing it. But for future stuff, I think this image still has a chance to be included in something, but it would need to be really big, almost like a mural size, or like take up the side of an entire building or something, so that the when you experience it, you have to walk up to it, and then the figure gets larger and larger. So it's very much kind of about monument, but maybe even pilgrimage, and kind of coming to a larger than life figure and thinking through what that means. And so that small version, the intellectual property image, made its way into this show and then became the thing that was inspiring all these other works on paper and these experimental like sculptural assemblages where I'm using this air dry clay and then using that as like the substrate that then holds these metal flags as well as like steel bars. And this is a show that I had in Dallas, Texas recently at a new gallery space called Terrene. And I love this space. They decided to, they renovated it. It used to be a storefront, but they renovated it to have, the really beautiful walls and clean space for you to present the work. And then they kept the integrity of the tile and the tin roofs, which I really appreciated, because then there was all of these like kind of aesthetic or visual connections between what was happening in my work and then the space, which wasn't entirely planned, but was, I just think, a nice venue for the work to be shown and experienced. This piece is titled Incoming, and I think it goes back to that sculpture called Hooked with the beadwork that was coming up, because it made me think of like swarm or hive mentality, and where this occurs in nature. So how insects or birds have strength in numbers and how they kind of follow each other and can create all these beautiful patterns and movements in nature. So I was thinking about that, number one, but then also started to really try to investigate why I kept creating this shape, why I kept making it over and over again. And again, I think it can be a soft sculpture, but it can also be, it's like there are these disembodied limbs, so they're kind of flying around. They can be these alien forms, they can be these insects, they can be these like soft sculptures with like a tail. I've had other people look at this and then they think that it's fingernails. So I like that it can be all of these things. And they're diving into this like pink pool or portal or puddle, which to me is again an entry or exit point. But it started to make me think also about the influence of Navajo creation stories and the alternate and different universes in which we came up out of. And so I love that too. And it doesn't have to be at the forefront of the conversation or the reading of this work, but I think for me that's inherently present. And here's a behind the scenes. This is in the studio. And I usually like to take like pictures when I see kind of visual similarities happening. So I did like that my nails were matching the pink, and then the skin tone of the clay, and then the green bubble wrap that I was using to wrap up the work to send it to the gallery. And then this is how it looks though once it was in the gallery. Everything's intentional when we're putting together the exhibition. So the pedestal heights are important for the work to be experienced at these different levels. And I liked that this like ball, this sphere, could also be a stand-in for a head or for a weight. And yeah, there's a simplicity to it. With the air dry clay as well, because I'm not a ceramicist. And the air dry clay, at first when I started to work with it, it was out of kind of necessity or accessibility, where I was using it to create miniature models for bigger sculptures. And then I realized, wait, I might be able to actually just use this instead of like learning how to fire things. And because it felt like sometimes when I have an idea, it feels like really like it needs to happen then. It's like there's like kind of an urgency or an immediacy to it. And so I tried to honor that versus kind of be hard on myself and be like, you have to learn how to do this before you can actually do this. And I was like, no, like the air dry clay, there's something about it that's really beautiful because it's very fragile. And over time too, it responds to the oils in your hands. And then once it dries down, there's this like powdery texture that happens on the outside. And that powdery texture that kind of has a white cast to it, I think is visually really beautiful and looks similar to the gouache that I use in the collage work. And so there's kind of a material sensibility that I love. And yeah, there's, again, this immediacy, so I can make it relatively quickly, but there is still evidence of the hand because it is shaped and it will hold some of the impressions of fingerprints and dimples and that kind of thing. This next piece is also in that show, which I had made it and then we were thinking about editing it out because it felt almost like different or too different than the air dry clay pieces and the works on paper. But I really, really wanted it in the show. And this is another angle of it. And then this is how it's installed in the space. And so I think we came to a really good answer, which was to put this work in this kind of corner of the gallery. And what I love about it being in this corner is it's kind of sitting there and like watching and looking over the rest of the work. So it activates it again in this like really subtle way, but it makes it feel almost like it's like the docent or it's like the, the person in the gallery that's like watching you. But in some ways it's almost like it's watching over the rest of the work. So I really appreciate that about it. And yeah, I mean, I think I wrote something about this piece too that I can share. Let me pull up what I wrote about it. So this piece is titled, Her Nickname Was String Bean, and I feel like it encapsulates so many things I'm working through and processing, such as health and sickness, needing support to be balanced, being at rest but being perched right on the edge of something, about to fall off, being stretched thin, hairy, conjoined, misunderstood, taking a time out, hungry but unable to consume due to grief, heartbreak, or on the flip side, stuffing something too full, a binger and bile. So much is wrapped up in this work, but it could also just be about loving string beans when I was little, or how my grandma had a garden where she grew them, and together we'd pick them, wash them, snap them, cook them, and eat them. It's okay if you don't get it, but if you do, that's cool too. So, yeah, this piece needed to be in the show, so it was in the show. And then I wanted to include, when I was putting the presentation together, I was trying to think of things that might interest you guys. And I was like, when I was thinking about when I've attended art lectures, I love seeing behind the scenes. So this is in the studio where I'm like thinking about that piece in relationship to this other photograph that I had taken. And that photograph did get edited out of the exhibition, so it's not in the show, but I loved the relationship between the two. And then this next piece, titled Too Much and Not Enough, I think the title kind of speaks for itself, but something about this piece that I really like and wanted to talk about were these bags of, this bag of oranges. I knew that I wanted a bag of oranges, an image of it. And so I Googled that and then went down a rabbit hole. There are so many different kinds of images of bags of oranges. So I was looking at hundreds of images of bags of oranges and selecting kind of my top 5. And then I printed them out, similar process to the socks, where I then printed them out at different scales and sizes. And this was the selected winner. This was the one that I liked the most because it felt like the original image is kind of vintage, like a vintage older image of a bag of oranges. So almost as if it were from 1990 and it was used for one of those grocery store ads or something. So I liked that about it. And I also liked that it was in this red bag that was a woven bag that looked like a net. And then I loved that the shape of it was long because where I wanted it in the composition I wanted it to be here. And I wanted also that color relationship to almost match 1-to-1. Because what was laid down first was that strip of the painted kind of watercolory red white. And this matched almost perfectly. Those tones were very much similar. And so this bag of oranges then started to look like intestines or some kind of entrail, or because it was connected to this red swatch, it started to look more bodily and feel like bloody and all these other things. And I was like, perfect. I love it. Moving forward, or something else about this, you notice that that shape, that curved shape, that dome, which is referencing a hogan, representation of home, but then it also was referencing this sculpture on the right-hand side, which is titled Skull Cap, which I had been looking at the image titled Intellectual Property and was thinking about this shape of a simple curve being a dome, being a mound, being a breast, being a hip, but also being a head. And so this piece, Skull Cap, was made, and I love, again, these nice little moments where you can see that repetition of simple things like shape, color, form. And I like that about those pieces. So kind of zooming out, this one is titled Off the Rails. And behind the scenes for this piece, the image I wanted to talk about was this one that was shared with me. And what I ended up doing with it. So I printed out the image and then cut out the truck and then used charcoal to mimic the look of tracks or tire tracks. And so and then the position of it, right? Taking it from kind of a slightly turned and making it more kind of central. And I liked putting it in this piece and making it look like it's kind of going a little haywire, but it's on to like bigger and better things. I was thinking about kind of traveling across country and the different places that you go to, how that inspires you or harms you or influences you. And there's a lot of other things that are happening in this piece too. But for the sake of time, I'll move forward. And we're getting close to the end. Bear with me. The next piece I wanted to talk about was surrender. This is one of those assemblages. And what I liked about this piece is actually the back of it. And you can, when you're in the gallery, you can walk around it and you can see that. So there's this nice reveal because it's in the back of the gallery. So you walk up to it and you see this like the white side, and then you walk around it and then you see the evidence of the red fabric that's been painted over. And you can also start to see some of the, if you're looking really closely, the sinew that was used to sew it into place and attach it to that steel bar. And that mound, by taking it from kind of resting on a pedestal and putting it up onto the wall, it then again started to become almost like a belly with a belly button. So as if this like flag is stuck in a belly button, or other bodily associations. I was very much thinking about, and I guess I should have started with this, that the exhibition was titled Skirmish. And I wanted to title it Skirmish as a play on words. So thinking about skirmish, the definition being related to warfare, but then the sh at the end being the silencing of voices. So skirmish. And it was like really good to say, and it was like a really beautiful word. And so a lot of these works are kind of playing with languages of war, or in these collages, there's almost as if something's happened, and this is the aftermath of that happening. And so whether it's war or some sort of implied violence, or like referencing trauma or histories that are complicated and intertwined, I think that, that word skirmish was a way to sum it all up. And so this piece, surrender, kind of thinking of this white flag as being to surrender to your circumstance, or to raise a white flag to ask for peace. And given what's happening, across the world, globally, the different conflicts that are happening, it's very much on my mind. And this is my way to respond to it. And maybe shift consciousness or have people think about it in a different way. This next piece is a short video that was, again, put into like a back gallery room and experienced. And this one, the sound is important, and it's titled Rattling Flags. So we'll go ahead and watch it. So this video was on a loop. And so again, the reference to cyclical systems that are in place, infinitely going on. But what I liked about it is this kind of soundscape where it comes in, and I was thinking of like a cavalry or troops kind of coming into a place and then like leaving a place. And so this like, again, it kind of goes up into a climax and then it leaves. So I know we're kind of getting, I could talk for a long time. So I'm going to quickly kind of skip through these last ones. And some of these are just some, again, behind the scenes of like what I'm working on right now. These are some scraps of collaging pieces. I like to include this because it kind of shows the different sources in a way, where it's like I'm looking at advertisements, I'm looking at magazines, newspapers, old kind of ephemera that I might purchase at a bookstore or that kind of thing. I'm also painting swatches and cutting out shapes. I'm taking photographs and then I'm taking pieces from those photographs. And so it kind of creates a plethora of options. And then I make these decisions in the studio. And what I'm working on right now at the Lunder, here's a couple of examples. So I'm still doing the assemblages and works on paper. When I got to the Lunder, I went to some of the local antique stores and I found this like moccasin, and it was $1 and it was missing its mate. But it was obviously like used and like well used and worn on the bottom. And I kind of felt conflicted. I was like, do I take this home with me? Do I buy this? But it felt almost like I needed to kind of save it from the landfill or that kind of thing. And so I then made this other kind of shape that mimics or looks kind of like a footprint or the shape of the moccasin with the air dry clay. And then it's hanging on the edge of it. And what I like about it is like if you walk by it and the air hits it just right, it kind of bounces. And you can also see the backside. You can see that wear to the bottom of the moccasin. I don't know if it'll stay this way, but I think it's kind of working. So it might. And then this piece, again, thinking about Navajo creation stories and emerging from different worlds. And then this feels almost also like a Pandora's box or something where all these figures are escaping and coming out. And so I quite like that. I think, yeah, I will leave it there. So thank you guys so much for being here. You've been really generous with your attention, and I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Natani. We do have time for one or two questions, and I'll bring you the mic so our Zoom audience or online audience can hear you. Any questions?
Thank you. My name is Christopher. Thank you for a beautiful presentation. Very inspiring work and very intriguing. And as a father, I just want to say that I think your dad is very proud of you and you're doing great things. The thing that struck me amazingly throughout the whole presentation was the presence of lines or the absence of lines. And the more I started thinking about it, the more I started seeing them everywhere. Most notably in the very first photograph with your father, all the crazy line squiggles on the walls, which are very inspiring, I'm sure. But then as I started seeing even the map lines, the window lines, and then I was really shocked by the socks, which in the photograph have a line right through the tip of the socks. And I started noticing that you're lining lines everywhere in your photographs. The Navajo truck has lines. But then when you draw them, you take the lines away sometimes, and I wondered if you could say more about what lines mean to you and how you use them in your work. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that. I think a lot about the weight of lines, especially with the works on paper. and the newer sculptural assemblages where I'm using a steel bar, which is a line. But in the works on paper, yeah, that kind of the weight of a line does become important, because if we go to something like this, it's so thin. It's like as if it could be blown away or snipped, or it creates a different association and a different tension than something else that has more maybe density or a confidence to it too. So there's a lot of like these really floaty, ephemeral, barely there lines, and then some more that are a bit more prominent and kind of assertive and present. I think about that. I mean, I have a whole toolkit of all the different types of pencils and the different weights that you can get from that. I do think about it a lot. When it comes to the maps and looking at this, I was immediately looking at all the different lines, and then how can you extend the line? So from the map and extend it into the rest of the collage. And so to me, it was this continuation, or connection, connecting the dots, as simple or as cliche as that sounds too. And in kind of the early work, and how I described it was this mind mapping, which was really a way for me to like work through a lot of stuff and figure out how it's connected to these other things. And so it was like as simple as like, this thing is like literally connected to this other thing. And so it was a way to make sense of what I was going through, or the world that I was living in, or the things that I was experiencing. So it's like, it's a metaphor. It's like engaging with like a long history of art, and then, has these moments where it can, kind of extend or fade away and get lost, or be tied down and tethered to something, kind of anchored down. I hope that kind of explains a little bit more about it. Yeah, thank you.
Time for one more question.
Hello again. I want to know, I was listening to you talk about your pieces, these minimalist pieces with a lot of white space in the pieces, and all the stories that are behind it. Now, how do you decide what's going in and what's going to leave out?
Yeah. Yes, there is a lot of white space. I do that on purpose. I work on a very specific paper too. It's this extra white hot press paper that's a watercolor paper. So it's very like, it absorbs the color really nicely. It creates these moments where the watercolor can really shine, or the acrylic can really like be vibrant and saturated, but it's also smooth. And so all of that's really intentional. And then leaving these like negative spaces, but then thinking about, again, how your eye is going to move around it, and then the stories that are behind it. So it's a lot of moving parts. And I think what helps me when I'm in the middle of making these decisions, is I will be working flat, like on a table, large table. And so I'm looking at it kind of aerially, but then being able to move around it and really consider all parts of it. But then there's a moment where I'll like take it and pin it up, and then step away from it and kind of do that classic art thing where you go close and go back, and then leave the room and come back in, and then be like, that's what's missing. So sometimes that will help. Because some of these elements are collaged as well, I will move them around. And so sometimes there'll be like 20 other elements in this, but they're not pasted down, and I'm moving them around. And then process of elimination, just starting to take away things, put things back. Sometimes if I'm not like 100% sure, I'm still on the fence about something, I will take a little bit of like tape and then tape it on there, put it up on the wall, and again, do that thing where I might leave and come back the next day. And if I've like slept on it and I come in and it feels right, then I'll take a little pencil mark, kind of outline it ever so slightly, and then paste it down. And then also try to tell myself that I'm going to be making, in theory, I can make hundreds of these. I don't have to solve it all in one piece, and that's okay. So even if I look back at it years from now and feel like I could have done more or changed it, or it's like, well, it's one of many, and it's part of kind of a story that's like life's work. So yeah, it's a process for sure. Yeah.
Thank you once more for Natani Notah.